It is my great joy to introduce our speaker today. This is my son, Robert Lyons. Robert is a pastor in a church in Anaheim, California. He's the young adults pastor, among many other things. We've had a very exciting weekend in our family. And I want to introduce you to my sweet daughter-in-law, Kyla. You just have to wave, maybe. Okay. I want to show you a picture. They came with an announcement. Look at this announcement. I am going to be a grandfather. So we are all very excited about that. Robert, preach to us today. Thank you. Love you.
Give it up for Pastor Eddie. Isn't he awesome? Yeah, we're so glad to be with you guys today. I know it's like a cool weekend, like an exciting weekend where we get to announce something like it's pretty cool and share it with our family. And man, you guys are my home church. You guys are some of my favorite people in the world. So we thought it'd be so cool to get to share it with you guys as well. And man, I tell you what though, it was pretty crazy when we found out that we were pregnant. And I remember I found out on Christmas morning. What a gift, you know? And I remember my wife found out the day before, and I flew in we spent Christmas with her family in Indiana. I flew in Christmas morning. We had Christmas Eve services and stuff in California. And so she told me on like Christmas morning, right? I'm like groggy. I like flew through the night and stuff. And I just kept saying, "You're joking. You're joking. You're joking." She goes, "I wouldn't joke about this." So like 8 more jokings later, I'm like, okay, I think I believe her. I think this is real. I just kept, like, the irony was not lost on me because, like, finding out on Christmas, and I'm like, man, on the day that we celebrate an unexpected pregnancy, we're celebrating an unexpected pregnancy, which is pretty cool. But we are so excited. We don't know what we're doing, but we're very excited, and it's gonna be really fun. But you know, I love getting to come back to High Street. This is one of my favorite churches in the entire world. And man, whether you're here today or watching online, we're just so glad that you guys are here with us today. And I just want to thank you so much for the investment that you've made in my life. And you know, that's what I love about church. You know, that we can be a community that comes together and we can pour into each other and we can build each other up for good works. And man, I know that I am so much better today because people in this room and in the previous service have invested their time and their attention in me. And so I just want to thank you for that. And I just want to continue to keep doing it for more people that are here. This church has just made such a big impact in the world and on me personally. So thanks again for letting me be here today. I count it such an honor to be with you all. And today I'm so excited to get to talk about something that I think is so pivotal to us as we try to figure out how to live lives that follow Jesus. How do we live lives that are like Jesus? How do we learn how to follow Jesus better? How can we take away some of the things in our lives that are actually limiting us from living the lives that God wants us to live? But before we do that, I want to ask you a question. How many of you guys have ever had to like fill out an application for something? Anyone in the room? Yeah, you can't go too long in life without having to fill out an application for just about everything. You know, if you want to apply for a job, you have to fill out an application. If you want to apply to get into a school, you have to fill out an application. Like there's an application for if you want to get married. There's an application if you want to buy a house or move into an apartment. Like there's just applications for everything. And the application is to do this. The application, it distills the necessary information that you have that the organization needs in order to either accept you or reject you. This is what you need. So in an application, there's you write your name, and then there are a bunch of checked boxes right there, and it's on these boxes that you get to determine who you are. You get to determine what you're about. You get to determine the kind of person that you are. And a lot of these boxes are very straightforward, very normal. It doesn't take a long time to figure out. Like, you know, your age, your name, your gender, your height. Like, those are all very normal. But then, I don't know if you guys know this, but some of these applications, they get real personal real quick. You know what I'm talking about? Like, we start out with, name, age, gender, height. Then they're like, hey, how much money do you make? Also, prove it. Let me see the last couple statements that you have in your bank account. And you're like, whoa, that's a little personal. Or maybe they're just like, hey, why did you leave your last job? Also, what are the names of your 3 last superiors? I wanted their numbers. I'm going to text them, find out some things about you real quick. Or maybe the last, like, hey, have you ever been arrested? If so, why? You're like, these are questions that, like, I'm not going to tell on a first date, let alone, these names like trying to like hide. But these organizations with these applications, they're just like, let's get to the good stuff. Let's figure this out now, And I remember the season of my life where I just filled out a ton of applications. This is when I was in college. I think it was like a sophomore in college here in Springfield. And my dad was working, and my dad said, hey, you need to get a second job. I don't know if I just looked like I needed more money or I just had like way more time on my hands than anything else, but he's just like, you need a second job. And so I'm just like, where, Dad? I'm like, where, Dad? But didn't say it like that. But if you're in California, you would say it like that. Dad. But he's like, you need to get a second job. And he's like, and this is where you need to apply. You need to apply at Sam's Club. You go to Sam's Club. They're a great company to work for. You need to work at Sam's Club. And throughout my college experience, my dad would periodically just go to me and tell me, you need to work at Sam's. You need to work at Sam's. I'm like, do you want to work at Sam's? What's happening here? And so I remember I went to Sam's Club, and he told me before, just like, I'm sure like a lot of your fathers have like told you how to apply for a job. He's like, hey, don't look like a slob. Get dressed up. Look like you know what you're doing, okay? And then he's like, when you go in there, you need to go and ask to apply for a job. And then after that, you fill out the application, and you don't just turn it back to the Joe Schmo who gave you the application. You say, I would like to speak to a manager, please. And then after you talk to the manager, you're like, thank you, ma'am, thank you, sir. I look forward to working with you and hearing back from you. And then, boom, you leave, and you're like shooing for the job. And so I'm like psyching myself up for this. I'm like, here we go, we're doing it. So I walk into Sam's, and I'm like ready, I'm dressed up, I'm like have my script ready, and I walk up to this like 20-something girl who is there working the counter. I'm like, hello, I would like to apply to work at Sam's Club. And she like barely looks up from what she's doing. She goes, there are computers over there you can apply for. And I'm like, this is unexpected, but no problem. I will divert and go to this thing. I'm like, this is cool as technology. We apply on the computers now. And so there's 2 desktop computers, and I go to the one desktop, and I fill it out. And then I realize, I'm like, wait, I don't have anything to turn into like the manager. Like, I don't have a reason to talk to the manager, right? And so I'm like, not a problem. I'm not going to go home empty-handed. So I walk back to that 20-something girl. I'm like, listen, hey, I just filled out an application online. Great system, by the way. It's flawless. I'd love to speak to your manager, let them know that I'm looking forward to hearing back from them. And she looks up at me and she goes, managers don't speak to potential employees. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. I'm the potential employee. Like, I still want to talk to me. We'll just get together. Because we got to know each other a little bit. We're going to be working together, so we'll probably be good. And then she goes, managers don't talk to potential employees. And after like because I'm not going home to my dad to tell him that I didn't do what he told me to do, right? And so I'm like, no, you don't understand. And so finally she said, listen, you can come back and apply as many times as you want. I said, deal, lady. And so I walk out. I didn't say that to her. That's like, what you wish you would have said. And then afterwards, like I remember over the course of the next like week and a half, 2 weeks, I would go back to Sam's and I would walk in and I would apply on the computer over there. And then I would go and I would talk to someone working and be like, hey, I would like to speak to a manager. And they would say, managers don't speak to potential employees. And I said, I'll be right back. And so, I would do this like day after day, and then finally, after like all these different times, I would go back and they would say, managers don't speak to potential employees. And I would keep coming back, and I finally started to come around to the idea that managers do not speak to potential employees. And I remember just thinking like this, okay, I get it, okay? And so I'm like, I've applied like 6 times now, so maybe we'll hear a call back. And a couple weeks went down, and I was like, I haven't heard anything back from Sam's. Like, what's going on? I haven't received a call. I haven't received an email. Like, I haven't received anything back. And I just remember thinking, like, why haven't I received anything back? And I began to think about what I had put on the application. I began to think about the checked boxes that I selected next to my name. And I started to think about, like, hey, the only thing they know about me is just like my basic information and who I am based on the boxes that I selected. And I realized that based on what I had put in about myself, they were like, we're good. We're fine. We don't need it. Have you ever felt something like that before? Have you ever felt like, you kind of say who you are, you select who you are, and then someone says, it's not good enough. Like, I'll pass. You know, it's this like weird realization that happens when you look at what you would write down on these boxes, these labels, and you look at it and it's kind of like a snapshot of who you are. And I don't know if you've ever thought this, but maybe you're like, what's so wrong with me? What's so wrong about these labels that I have selected that I've been labeled less than by other people? You know, most of us, we begin to start attaching the labels that we have put on ourselves or that other people have put on you. That maybe these are things that we would put on a form, and we start to use these to inform how we think about ourselves. We use these labels and boxes to inform our identity. And we put new ones on there as well. So maybe you're in here and you're like, you know what? You know, single or married. You know, I'm the single person. That's who I am. Like that's the lens I use to filter everything, every decision-making thing through. That's how people look at me. It's just they see the singleness. And so like that's just who I am. Or maybe you're here and you think of income, you're like, I'm the rich guy, okay? I'm the guy who takes care of everybody around here. I'm the guy who has it going on. So like that's how I look at other people. That's how other people look at me. Or maybe you're the person in here like, you know, I'm the financially kind of a mess person, and I'm actually like kind of embarrassed by this label. I try to do everything I can to like hide this label from other people. And I just don't want people to know about that. Or maybe you're in here and you're like, I'm honest, I'm too old. Like I can't dream anymore. I'm too old. I can never step out and do what I feel like God would want me to do because I don't really have anything left in the tank. Or maybe you're here and you're like, I'm too young. God would never use anyone like me. Like I can't, I'm so young, I don't know everything about everything yet. I can't do that. Or maybe you're the person, you're like, you know what, I'm the creative one. Like I'm the creative one. Or maybe I'm just not creative. It's just not me. I can't do that. Or maybe you're like, you know, I was a high school quarterback. I've got it going on. I'm athletic. You know, I'm cool. Or maybe you're like, yeah, I was kind of the band geek in high school, and I still look at myself like through the lens of like, I'm not as cool. Or maybe you're like, you look at yourself through like, I went to that highly rated university. You know, I did well for myself. You know the people who constantly slip where they went to school like all the time? Like you're like, I'm doing well. Did you know I went to Harvard? I didn't know if you knew that. Just wanted to check that in there. Or maybe you're in here, you're like, I got waitlisted at a junior college. Or maybe you're in here and you're like, listen, I'm the attractive one. And if that's you, good for you. Or maybe you're in here and you're like, I've got a nice personality, you know? And what we don't realize is that the labels that we wear, they end up defining our identity. And our identity is the thing that will either lock us down or free us up. And so often, we look at our labels, we look at these things that we put on ourselves, or maybe someone else in your life has put on you, and we submit to them. And we submit to them almost as if it holds us hostage. And you never go out for that team because you're like, I'm just unathletic. I can't do that. Or you never go for that promotion because you're like, listen, everyone's told me I've been a pencil pusher my entire life, and I could never do that. I don't know if I could never do that. Or maybe you keep everybody at an arm's distance from yourself because you've believed the lie and the label that I'm just damaged goods. I've been hurt. And so honestly, I don't want to hurt anyone else. I don't want anyone to hurt me. So I'm gonna filter that through every decision-making process, through every relationship that I'm ever gonna have. And I'm just damaged goods. I'm gonna keep you away from me because really, I don't want to hurt you and you don't want to hurt me. Or maybe you're like, you know, I'm never gonna join a small group. I'm never gonna do one of the 5 things we've been talking about here at High Street. I'm never gonna join the team. I can't share my faith or find the one with anyone because honestly, I'm just not that spiritual. Like, I know, like, we live in the kind of the Bible Belt, but, like, you know, that's just kind of where it ends for me. I'm just kind of like, you know, I just go to church maybe a little bit, but I could never do that because I'm just not a spiritual person. And the problem that comes when you submit to these labels that you or someone else has put on you is that God, He has a plan for you. He has built you with a purpose. He's put gifts and abilities inside of you that are only going to be used when you step out into faith. He's put things inside of you that he's not put in anyone else because he knows that he wants you to be a part of his plan. He wants you to step out and to make a difference in people's lives. He wants you to drop these labels because he knows these things are holding you back. But if we constantly are looking at these labels and we are filtering our life and our identity and our decision making and everything that we do through these labels, then we will never experience the power of God at work in our lives. And we will never experience the joy that comes when you say, God, I'll do what you want. I feel underqualified. I feel like I'm not good enough, but I'll do it. You know, there's a man in history that was extensively written about in the Bible, and he was a man who had let labels kind of dictate the course of his life. You know, for most of his life, actually. And when he was 80 years old, he decided, you know what? I've lived with these for too long, so I'm going to drop them. And when he dropped his labels, his life forever changed, and the course of history as we know it forever changed. Let me give you the backdrop of this story. Nearly 2 million Israelites have just escaped slavery in Egypt. And then they've gone away, and Pharaoh finally relented after these horrible plagues that have just decimated the land. And finally, he just let them go. But after the Israelites leave, I'm sure someone from the Egyptian treasury ran over to Pharaoh and said, Pharaoh, do you know what you're doing? You're letting our entire economy just walk through the door. And this grief that Pharaoh had inside of him quickly turned into rage. And he assembled the might of the Egyptian army. And he's like, let's get everybody together. We're going to go after these people, and we're just going to kill them. And so he assembles this vast army. And he goes after the Israelite people. And word gets back to the Israelite camp that, hey, Pharaoh is coming after you. And he's not just coming after you to recapture you, probably. He's going for blood. He's going for blood. And so now these Hebrew people, these Israelite people are stuck. They're between a rock and a hard place. They've left Egypt, and they're at the bank of the Red Sea, and they can't go through the Red Sea because it's a big body of water, and they can't go back because it's the army. And so they're like, what do we do? We're in a situation. And this is where we pick up the story in Exodus chapter 14, verse 21. It says this: Then Moses raised his hand over the sea, and the Lord opened up a path through the water with a strong east wind. The wind blew all night, turning the sea into dry land. So the people of Israel walked through the middle of the sea on dry ground with walls of water on each side. Can we stop for like 1 second? I think sometimes we can be in church for so long and we read these stories so over and over again since we were kids that we like forget the impact and the magnitude and like what we're actually reading. Like we're actually reading about one of the coolest moments in the history of the world. Literally God parting a sea and people going through it. Like it's just mind-blowing. It says this in verse 23, Then all the Egyptians, all of Pharaoh's horses, chariots, charioteers, chased them into the middle of the sea. But just before dawn, the Lord looked down at the Egyptian army from a pillar of fire and cloud, and he threw their forces into total confusion. He twisted their chariot wheels, making their chariots difficult to drive. Let's get out of here, away from these Israelites, the Egyptians shouted. The Lord is fighting for them against Egypt. When all the Israelites had reached the other side, the Lord said to Moses, Raise your hands over the sea again. Then the waters will rush back and cover the Egyptians and their chariots and the charioteers. So as the sun began to rise, Moses lifted his hand over the sea, and the water rushed back into its usual place. The Egyptians tried to escape, but the Lord swept them into the sea. Then the waters returned and covered all the chariot and charioteers and the entire army of Pharaoh, all of the Egyptians who had chased the Israelites into the sea. Not a single one survived. You talk about the power of God at work. You know, if I were to say the name Moses to you, this is how most people would remember this man. They would remember the man who God used to do miraculous things. And like when we look at like the power of God at work in the Bible, we oftentimes go straight to Moses and say, look at this dude. Like this guy, God used him to do amazing things. Like we saw the Red Sea. Moses was the man who God spoke with and delivered this law, this new way of living that would set the nation of Israel apart from every other nation of Israel. And he was kind of the spokesperson for this that would deliver it. But Moses, he was in some of the most amazing miracles that we've ever seen before. But what if I told you the fact that Moses was even in a position to even be there for God to use him was one of the biggest miracles of all? Because here's Moses' story. And I want to let you know about the labels that Moses pinned on himself before he ever lifted high his hands in the water. His earliest memories were probably walking through the palace of Egypt. Although he was adopted, he would have grown up in the luxury of the royal family. And Pharaoh would have been his grandfather. And at some point in his life, we don't know when it was exactly, whether he was young or when he was a little bit older, it was discovered that he was not, in fact, Egyptian royalty, but really, truly, he was, in fact, a Hebrew slave child. And he was given a new label. I'm a slave. I'm sure Moses wrestled with these ideas of who am I? Am I second class? Who's my real family? I'm sure these became all-consuming thoughts for Moses. And then one day, he goes out to see his people and to see what's going on, and he sees an Egyptian taskmaster just beating the tar out of this Hebrew person. And Moses kind of has this high sense of justice about him. He's kind of like a person who sees something wrong, and he's like, I can't stand this. I will have to stop this. It's kind of like my wife. My wife is a very high justice person. I don't know if you know this about Kyla, but Kyla, I call her the public justice warrior, okay? Because if she sees something that's wrong in a grocery store or someone if she was at this grocery store and saw someone, this kind of crazy person talking to this other person, kind of way misrepresenting God and being very condemning, and so Kyla has this sense of justice, and so she walks up to that person and she's like, that's not what it is. And she sets the tone straight. She ends up closing the store down to the people. The workers at the store are whispering, hey, you're so brave. You're so brave. She's like, it's fine. She's the kind of person who's just who recently we had some scam callers trying to scam money out of her. And she's the kind of person to not just be like, okay, this is dumb. She engages with the person. And once they realize that she's not in on it, they hang up. And she literally called back 20 times the other day. And she's like, listen, this isn't right what you're doing. It's not right. Moses would have done that too. He had this high justice about him. And Moses, when he looks upon this Hebrew taskmaster beating his fellow Israelite, he just gets full of rage. And so he comes out, and I don't know if it was a moment of bravery or stupidity, and he goes out and he starts talking to this guy, and these words began to go to blows, and all of a sudden a new label gets put on Moses. Murderer. And Moses did his best to try to conceal his sin, to conceal this murder, to conceal this body, but word gets back to Pharaoh what Moses has done, and Pharaoh is furious. And he wants to kill Moses. And so Moses, scared for his life, runs away from the palace, runs away from Egypt, and puts on another label. Fugitive. And Moses, he gets to the place where he spends many years of his life, and he goes from the lap of luxury to obscurity in the desert. And he starts performing a job that was made for small boys. He becomes a shepherd. Listen, it's not a great career move back in the day when you go from whatever you were doing to a shepherd. That's what 12-year-old boys did. And so Moses, as he's tending sheep in obscurity in the middle of the desert, puts on a new label. Failure. I'm a failure. What am I doing with my life? And for 40 years, Moses believes that these labels have eclipsed any sort of label that God would put on him. And then one day, Moses, he's an old man. He's 80 years old. And God speaks to Moses. You know, I just love how God works. You know, I love, if it was me, I was, God, and I saw Moses kind of bogged down with all these labels. I don't know if I would be like, he's pretty old. Like, should we go like a younger, like, it's like a better, I feel like my return on investment may be better if I go for like a 20-year-old, you know what I'm saying? But God, he doesn't really care how old you are. God just wants you to experience the joy of putting him first. And he wants you to experience the joy of serving him. And he wants you to experience the joy that comes when you drop these other labels and put his label on. And this is what it says in Exodus chapter 3, verses 1 through 4. It says, one day, Moses was tending the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian. He led his flock afar into the wilderness and came to Sinai, the mountain of God. There, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a blazing fire in the middle of a bush. Moses stared in amazement and thought, and though the bush was engulfed in flames, it didn't burn up. This is amazing, Moses said. Yeah, that is pretty awesome. Why isn't the bush burning up? I must go see it. When the Lord saw Moses coming to take a closer look, God called him from the middle of the bush, Moses, Moses. Here I am, Moses replied. And in this moment, God audibly and visibly, he speaks to Moses. And he begins to unfold this amazing plan of redemption that he would be using Moses to be the main instrument for the people of Israel. I'm sure he went back and he's like, hey, remember that high justice sense that you had when you saw someone beat one of your fellow countrymen and how you thought this was not right? He's like, I'm going to use you to actually totally free your people. I'm going to use, this is great news, Moses. You're going to be an instrument for me. And God begins to put another label on Moses. Chosen for a purpose. But Moses, his response to when God wanted to put this new label on him, he actually points God, he's like, God, I know I've had a couple labels on me, but there's actually one that I don't know if I've told you about, but really, God, I'm a stutterer. I don't speak so good, if you want me to be a leader, this mouthpiece, that's the worst job for me because I can't do that. And I don't think I would be able to do this because I'm just not good at speaking. And I think sometimes this gets lost on us when we read this story. Understand this. Understand how heavy and weighty these labels that Moses identified with were. Because even after hearing the voice of God and seeing the power of God displayed, Moses said, I know that's awesome, but look at what I have. God, you can't use me, but look at this. I'm filtering everything through this, and I can't step out in faith. I can't do what you want me to do because look at what I have. Look at what I've been labeled with. Look at what I've been put on. And if I was God in this moment, I'd be like, forget you, dude. I'm moving on. What do you... And I'm God. Do you remember I created everything by design for a purpose? I knew what I was doing. This isn't a shock to me, what's happening. But then God, he doesn't do that. And this is another thing I love about God. God isn't because oftentimes we can do this to God, can't we? God may call us and be like, hey, I want you to step out and I want you to volunteer for this youth event that we're having. Hey, I want you to join a team. I want you to join a group. I want you to share your faith that's been laying dormant in your life with the people you work with. And then we're like, God, but no, you don't understand. You see this? I can't. I don't know enough. I'm not smart enough. I can't do it, God. And the amazing thing about God, and he's not caught off guard when he calls us out and then we give him this excuse of these labels in our life. And God, he's actually patient with us. And he's kind to us, and he sits with us. And just like Moses, and just like what he can do with you in your life, and with Moses, he kind of sits with him, and he begins to untangle all of these labels that have been put on him by other people or that he has put on himself. And he begins to untangle Moses from these years of this supposed identity to try to give him this new identity. And it was only when Moses dropped the labels that God was able to use him to do miraculous things. And people, for generations to come after Moses, and even today we're talking about it thousands of years later and thousands of miles away from this actually happening, we talk about Moses as this great man of faith. We talk about how God used him to lead this difficult group of people. And we talk about how he was just, when we think about, and I'm sure the Hebrew people, generations later, when they think about who are the great men of our tradition, who are the great men of our country and our faith, people would have definitely said Moses. Moses is the man. He is a legend. He's the guy. But I think sometimes we forget that Moses was only able to be used by God when he dropped these labels. And I think it's important to understand here that Moses, he wasn't picked by God because of his labels. He was picked by God in spite of his labels. And maybe you're in here today and you feel like you've just been bogged down with labels that maybe are unfair to you, or maybe you know they're true and you're just embarrassed about it. Maybe you're here, I just don't know what to do. Can I read a verse to you that so gives me courage and so gives me comfort? This is because I don't know about you guys, but I can get so insecure with stepping out and following God because I don't think I'm good enough. But this verse actually gives me inspiration. It gives me what I need to actually be able to follow God. And it says this in 2 Corinthians 5, verses 16 through 17. It says this: "So we have stopped evaluating others from a human point of view. At one time, we thought of Christ merely from a human point of view. How differently we now know him. This means that anyone who belongs to Christ has become a new person. The old life is gone, and the new life has begun." What this verse is saying is, hey, if you belong to Christ, if you have begun a relationship with Jesus, these labels that you've used to filter every decision that you've ever done, like, these are the old life. These are gone. You don't have to be defined by these anymore, because this is part of the old life. You have a new life. You have a new life that's full of Jesus. It's full. It's this new life that Christ gives us. Let me put it a different way. God, Jesus, he's relabeled you. And your new label belongs to Christ. Belongs to Christ. And this label belongs to Christ that supersedes any other label that we could have on us. This new label is so weighty and the size of it is so great that no matter what we have been labeled by, it pales in comparison. And if you're in here today and maybe you're here and you think, okay, we get that, but I think that thinking is like pretty simplistic, Rob. Like, we don't, like, I've had a lot of labels on me. I have a lot of things going on. Maybe I've gone to church for a long time. I've just added Jesus to the list of my labels. And I've had a lot of labels. So if you look at the percentage-wise, it's just a percentage of the labels that I've put on me. But here's the deal. You believe that some labels are weighty and powerful. You just don't know that this one is that. This over 2 years ago, I did this program called Radical Mentoring. And it's a program where I got together with some guys in different stages of life, and we just went through and met once a month and just poured into God's word and poured into each other. And one of the first activities that we had to do was to write a 3-sentence obituary. Kind of morbid sounding, but it was really good. Because in this exercise, you had to create, it was a tiny paragraph that represented and summarized your 80 to 90 years on this planet. And in this exercise, you could be like, hey, what do you want your life to be about? What do you want to be remembered by you? And I think this is a really good exercise for you to try out. And it really puts in perspective a lot of things. And I really think this will show us kind of the weightiness of different labels that you identify with. And just to kind of, as an activity, I want to do something for us real quick. I've actually written 3 different obituaries for 3 different people who are still alive. And I want you to kind of guess and see if we can figure out who this is, just kind of illustrate this point. So the first one I'm going to read it says this. After a few wild years as a young man, including a DUI, he finally settled down, married a librarian, had twin daughters, and made a small fortune in oil. These are some details that will be remembered when we think of this person, but there's one detail about this person that honestly will supersede all these other details when we think about him. When we think of George Bush, we're going to think first that he was the 43rd president of the United States. That is a weighty label. When he is remembered, he's going to be remembered by that. Or how about this other one? All-state wide receiver in high school, donated several millions of dollars to charities, including opening a charter school in his own hometown. Like, this is a pretty awesome thing to be remembered by, but honestly, that's not going to be on the first sentence of when we read LeBron James's obituary here. This is what we're probably going to hear about LeBron James. It's going to be like this: NBA champion for 3 different things. That's right, I said 3 different teams because I'm believing the Lakers experiment is going to be a success. As a recent LA bandwagon person, I'm hoping that's going to be the case. A guy can dream, at least. What about this one? Heisman-winning trophy quarterback or running back at USC. All-pro NFL player, successful pitchman, and actor. Unfortunately, these aren't going to be the things that we first remember when we hear the name O.J. Simpson. And I say all this to illustrate the point that we believe, maybe you don't actually say it, but we all kind of know this to be true internally, that there's some labels that we wear that are weightier than others. That they're so heavy and so powerful that they eclipse everything that's on your chest. And this label that says belongs to Christ is the one that will define everything. It supersedes everything. It's weightier than every other thing that you could wear. Because we have to remember this, the labels that we wear, they inform our identity. And our identity will be the thing that will either tie us down or free us up. I have a friend named Kyle in California who this year, he told me that he was letting relationships, and he was letting, the relationships he had with friends and with, girlfriends, he was letting that define everything about him. And he said, I was looking through every decision making through this avenue, and he said he realized when the friends would go and relationships would go, he would be at such a low moment, and that's when I met him. And he said, listen, I don't want to be tied down anymore by these labels that I've put on me. I want to be freed up. And so Kyle decided to begin a relationship with Jesus. And when he did that, these labels that he was identifying as, that's the old stuff, that's gone. There's this new stuff, this new life that comes when you're with Christ. And Kyle, man, he's like a new person. You meet him, he was kind of quiet at first, but now this dude has found this joy and this identity that you're like, where did this come from, man? He's sharing his faith with people at school. He's sharing his faith with people on his swim team in college. He's serving all the time at church. He's finding any way that he can serve and be used by God to see people find and follow Jesus. All because Kyle decided, I'm done with these labels that are putting me down. I'm done with it. I'm gonna ask Jesus to forgive me of my sins. And I want him to take full control of my life, and I want to experience this freedom that I've been longing for. The freedom that happens when you dive into a relationship with Jesus. Maybe you're in here today, And while I've been talking, you've been feeling this idea, you've been feeling that you've been actually submitting to a label that's not helpful. You've been submitting to a label that has actually prevented you from stepping out in faith. And as you walked in here on your bulletin, you should have received a sticky note like this. And I want to ask you at this time just to take it out. And I want you to use a sticky note, and I want you to write down one label that you feel like has been weighing you down. And I want you to remember, that's not a label that defines you. That's not a label that can take control of you. We need to be people who remember, even if you've been a Christian for a long time, you can let other labels kind of come up, but we need to drop those labels. And we need to be people who remembers that belongs to Christ is the only label that I need.